everybody, welcome back to Rainandpours. I'm Mitch, and today this video is all about demystifying resin. So there is a lot of misinformation going around the internet, going around the paint pouring groups about resin and its safety to use and the properties of resin. So I wanted to address some of those and explain it in a scientific way to sort of put to rest some of the myths that are out there about resin. So the first thing I wanted to address is the toxicity of resin. Is resin toxic? The answer to that is yes, resin is highly toxic in its separate forms. So when you have part A and part B, the fumes, the liquids themselves, the vapors, everything about them is highly toxic. The reason for this is because resin is a solvent-based product. It means that it's a chemical base and there are free spots on the molecular chains that can react with everything around it. So let me explain that with this little jigsaw puzzle. So this is the easiest way I could think about it. And we all know about those little molecular chain things that you see in school. It's got little long parts and little balls and things like that to represent the different molecules. So for example, we'll start with a carbon atom. A carbon atom has 6 free spaces that it can connect to other molecules, other chemicals. So in water, for example, oxygen has 2 free spots, and with water, it's taken up by 2 hydrogen atoms, which only have 1 free spot each. So 1 free spot on hydrogen matches up with 1 free spot on oxygen, and the other hydrogen matches up with the other spot. That means that water is no longer reactive, so it won't react with anything else. Now, what we have, like pure water, is actually deadly. It's dangerous to us, and it's called dihydrogen monoxide. And there is a whole campaign on the internet about how deadly dihydrogen monoxide is and how thousands of people die from inhaling it every year. They literally drown. This campaign's been around for a very long time, and it's a classic example that's being applied to resin as well, because resin gets a very bad rap for good reasons sometimes, but a lot of it is myth and, you know, just misinformation. So let's go back to our chemical chain. So part A of resin has these free spots on its chemical chain, and those free spots match up perfectly with part B. Now if you have part A by itself and you leave that bottle open, that may react with the air, it may react with something that it spills on. If it touches your skin, it will react with your skin, it can seep into your bloodstream, and all of these free spots here will latch onto any molecules that are in the air, in your blood, and that is what makes it toxic. However, when you add part B, you've got to think of it as 2 parts of a puzzle. So once part A and B are mixed together, all of those free spots are taken up. So the chemical becomes what is called inert. And there are certain elements on the periodic table that are inert by nature. Argon is an inert gas. That means that it has all of its shells of electrons filled up with electrons. There is no free space for them to jump up and down and react with anything. So you can't react any other chemicals with argon. So that is the same thing that happens with resin. Once those 2 parts are mixed, those pieces match up and there is no space for any electrons to jump around, there's no space for any other molecules to join on, and it becomes safe. That is evidenced by it being set hard. It's no longer a liquid, and this is why mixing your resin absolutely as precisely as possible is so important, because if you assign 50 molecules to part A and 50 molecules to part B, those are going to match up to make 50 whole chains of resin. However, if you add 100 parts of part A and only 50 molecules of part B, you're going to have 50 free molecules of part A, which is going to mean that your resin is never going to set and it's still going to be reactive. And that is still toxic. However, when those 2 parts are together, it becomes safe. That leads me on to the next part, food safety. So food safety isn't something that a company can just slap on their bottle and say, yes, our product is rated for food safety. It actually has to go through applications and tests and experiments to make sure that their claims are true and being met. If they don't, the business will get shut down, guaranteed. I'm a chef, I know all about food safety. It's part of the basic training that we have to do every single day that we learn about in our education system. I know about food safety. Food safety is rated by the FDA in America and by the European Food Standards Authority in Europe. Those 2 organisations are some of the strictest organisations in the world, the European one more so than the FDA. that regulate whether something is food safe or not. Stone Coat countertop resin is rated by the FDA for food safety. That doesn't mean the FDA's just gone, oh yeah, you're claiming that it's food safe, let's slap a sticker on it and call it good, just to make you feel special. They don't do that. So anyone that claims read what's in the product and go to their website and find all that, it's total crap, because the FDA themselves is an organization that is built solely to regulate and to classify things as food safe. So if the FDA says it's safe, it's safe. Of course, they have a tendency to change their mind 10, 15, 20 years down the track as they continue to do research on products, which is absolutely fine. If you don't trust that, don't trust it, don't use resin. But if the FDA says it's fine, if the European food safety standards say it's fine, then I'm going to use it. So it's not just, you know, someone's called it safe just for the sake of having that as an advertising thing. They actually have to do tests. Now, in terms of food safety again, food safe is anything that's rated as food safe means that it does not impart any taste, smell, or properties of that chemical into the food. So that means if you put an apple on your countertop is not going to impart any taste, smell, or properties of that countertop into the apple. In terms of resin, if your parts have been mixed correctly and that resin is set and it's set hard and, you know, it's heat resistant and all that sort of stuff, which I'll get to in a minute, if it is properly set and cured, it is not going to impart taste, smell, or properties of the resin. In other words, it's not going to make your apple heat resistant to your apple. Your apple is going to taste like an apple, and it's not going to have any noticeable qualities of the resin. So putting an apple on your resin countertop does not make that apple now resin. That's the idea behind food safety. Your pipes in your houses are now made of PVC, which is a type of plastic. Resin is just a type of plastic. Resin actually occurs naturally in trees, so sap is a resin, and that is where all of the original art resins come from, and that is why resin's yellow. So even though we have natural resins and synthetic resins, all of them will yellow eventually because they come from the same plastic polymer chemical makeup that trees produce, and tree sap is yellow. We add all these agents and things to it to stop that reaction and stop the yellowing from happening, but ultimately they will all yellow eventually. And you know, not all resins are natural, I'm not saying that, but they come from a natural source. The idea behind it is from a natural source, and they have the same chemical makeup as the natural stuff. So in terms of food safety, if it is rated by the FDA, if it's rated by the European Food Standards Authority, you can use resin for food safety. Now that is for incidental contact. That means that you can put your food on top of it for a maximum period of 4 hours. And the reason I say 4 hours is because that is the safest, that's the window of safety out of the fridge that a product can sit at room temperature. And that's before bacteria start to grow and, you know, multiply, and they can cause health issues. So you're more likely to get food poisoning from the food itself than from the resin touching the food. Okay? And that 4 hours also includes preparation time. So if you are cutting up a leg of ham, and it is sitting on your bench for 3.5 hours, you put that in the fridge, that doesn't reset your timer. You've only got half an hour to eat that ham. So chances are, if you're preparing your food for 4 hours beforehand, you put it in the fridge and you take it out, and then you get food poisoning, that's not from the resin on your chopping board, that is from the food. And that is how they rate things for food safety. They've got to weigh up, you know, the bacterial thing versus the chemical thing. So if it is rated for food safety, it's gone through the testing, it is safe. The last thing I wanted to address is heat resistance. So certain resins are more resistant to heat and scratches than others. Reason being is the chemical chains. So art resins don't need to be heat resistant. The more that they modify this chemical structure, the more expensive it can get. The different elements that they use in creating that resin can be more expensive. So this is a relatively short molecular chain, right? It's only got four spots, 4 gaps on this one, 3 gaps on this one. Heat resistant resins tend to have much more free space. So the molecules are longer, which means that they can withstand scratches better, they can withstand more heat. As you apply heat to something, the molecules get excited, they want to stretch out, they want to expand. You know this from boiling water, it turns into a gas, those molecules get excited, they jump out of the pot and they turn into a gas and they float up into the atmosphere. Same thing happens with resin. It heats up in what we call an exothermic reaction, gives off heat. casting resins will give off a lot more heat because they rely on that reaction to cure the resin, and this is why it's very important to pick the right resin for the job. And the higher heat resistance a resin has, the longer those chemical chains often are, which make them more heat resistant and scratch resistant. Not all resins need to be that. You don't need to coat your artwork in a heat resistant resin because you're not going to put a boiling pot of water on there or a hot cup of coffee. So that is why art resins are usually cheaper than the heat resistant resins, because they don't have as long acrylic chains. They don't need to have those long acrylic chains. They don't need as much engineering. They don't need as much money to go into it to develop that heat resistance, and they don't need as expensive chemicals and compounds to make up those two portions of part A and B. Now, in terms of yellowing, all resins will yellow. There is not a single resin product on the planet that will not yellow after a period of time. We cannot tell what that period of time is. They do add UV inhibitors to almost all resins these days, and that will stop or prevent the resin from yellowing, but it will happen. Whether it's in a hallway, whether it's in directly in sunlight, sunlight's going to accelerate that because it's so much more UV coming down onto it, but it will yellow in a hallway anyway because that is the nature of resin. You cannot avoid that. Any company that says it will not yellow is a liar. It's a flat out lie. All resins will yellow. I shared a video in the sheleeart Bloom group not long ago and in the Little Piggy Facebook group, and I'll try and link that below and put it in the card, called The Secrets of Resin or something like that. And he had products from 9 or 10 years ago locked in a drawer there's no light whatsoever, and all of the resin products yellowed. Thinner applications tended not to yellow as much, but the thicker ones definitely yellowed. So I'll link that below. It was a really, really good video. And if anyone's qualified to talk on the longevity of resin, I believe it would be that, because those products are 10 years old. Whereas modern artists, we don't usually have that much experience with using resin on our artworks. In saying that, varnishes will also resin. And that leads on to the subject of archivability. So when something is rated as archival, that means suitable for use in an archive. There is no point putting an archival resin or an archival varnish onto your painting if your canvas is not archival, if your paints are not archival, and if you're not intending to put it in an archive. An archive would be pressure, oxygen, temperature, humidity controlled environment like the Louvre. So the Mona Lisa is kept in an archival under archival conditions. There is no UV light, there is no temperature, there is no it's temperature regulated, no oxygen, no humidity, nothing to degrade the quality of that product. So unless you want your artwork shown in a professional gallery for all of eternity, there is no point using an archival product. Archival means nothing if you are just a regular artist. So when people say, oh, this product isn't archival, that product's not archival, it doesn't matter, because unless you are intending it to be stored in an archive out of human eyes for the rest of eternity, there's no point. All art is throwaway art at the end of the day. If you look at all of Vincent van Gogh's painting, if you look at all these paintings from the 15th century that are still around, they all had varnishes stripped, reapplied because they turn yellow. So it doesn't matter what the bottles say, they will turn yellow eventually. Obviously you can prolong that period of time. I don't know if it's indefinitely, I can't say how long that is. The manufacturers can't even say how long that is, because the fact of the matter is they just haven't tested it. It hasn't been long enough for them to say our product definitely yellows over 2 years or over 10 years. So until they do those tests, and same thing goes for light fastness with paints, they have to be able to test those for over 2 years for them to say our product is light fast. That is the standard for testing light fastness. So back to resin, they will yellow. Okay, flat out, they will yellow. That's something that you need to know going into this. It will be more noticeable over a white background. However, if you put it over a darker background, the yellowing won't be as noticeable. And in the video, the gentleman does talk about adding pigments or dyes to the resin, and that seems to prevent it yellowing as often. And I have a feeling that's because the light coming into the resin is being scattered off the pigment particles, obviously giving us a blue light, a red light, whatever color the dye is, and bouncing it back out. So it's not having a chance to interact with the actual resin itself and cause that to yellow. Lastly is about safety. So when mixing resin, you always want to be wearing a respirator, gloves, and if you are allergic or anything like that, make sure you're wearing full hazmat suit, you know, long sleeves, cover your wrists and everything. So in my resin videos, I always talk about the double glove technique, and this is to prevent any resin getting on your hands. So you put on one glove, put a second one over the top, you pull the cuff of the bottom glove closest to your skin down further, so you leave a cuff of about this much on your wrist, and that way when you take that top glove off, you're not actually using your thumbs with any potential resin on there to touch your skin here. You're only ever touching that bottom glove. Then you can wipe that off with alcohol as you need to. Nitrile gloves are better for resin. They are recommended for resin because latex will absorb the resin. Nitrile is naturally chemical, puncture and scratch resistant, so that is the way to go. I'm also allergic to resin, so the nitrile means that the latex has been processed twice and all of the latex proteins are now taken out. That's when you get nitrile gloves, and they're often a lot thicker, a lot more resistant to those chemicals, and you can reuse them a couple of times, you know, a few batches of resin. Respirator, also important, like I mentioned as part 1. Resin is toxic in the fumes that come out of the bottles when they're mixing together, because that chemical reaction is happening. Some chemicals may float off into the air. I've recently heard about people mixing resin and tiny bubbles of liquid resin floating off into the air. I didn't know that was possible, and I haven't had that verified, but I have seen several people mention that they have noticed it. I've never noticed that with stone coat, so I don't know if that's dense enough that those bubbles don't happen, but things with art resin and KS resin, they have said that they have noticed that. So you do not want to be inhaling that. That will get attached to your lungs. The little villi in your lungs will hold on to that, and that can lead to potential serious injury and harm to your lungs. Just like sawdust will, just like mixing mica powders, anything that's got really fine particulates, you don't want those. Always use a mask that's rated P2 or higher, and you want it for organic and inorganic vapors, because resin is an inorganic vapor. Okay, so I think I've addressed all that I want to address. If there are any other questions about resin that you'd like me to answer, put them in the comments below, and I will do a bit of research into that. But end of the story here, and I will link to an article on dihydrogen monoxide, which is just water, and this whole campaign to have it banned, because it is highly amusing, and it basically just highlights how misinformation can cause people to rally behind something that doesn't need to be rallied behind. And, you know, dihydrogen monoxide is essential to life, but it can also be deadly. So that's what I wanted to get across with this video. Don't trust everything that some random in a group has said. Do some research, contact the manufacturer, get some more information from them. They cannot lie to you. If they are lying to you, they are, you know, they can be punished by law. They can be shut down. They can have everything taken off them. So if it's rated for food safety, go ahead and use it. Always wear protection, and do your research. Look into it, Google it, contact the manufacturer, contact the FDA. If a company is claiming that they're food safe and the FDA says, hang on a second, no, we haven't rated it as food safe, then don't use them, report them. But if they are claiming that and the FDA has approved it, it's good enough for me. So hopefully I've clarified a few things for you. If you like what I'm doing here, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.